Hi, everyone. Welcome to the PeopleForBikes Ratings 2019 webinar. My name is Jennifer Boldry. I'm Director of Research for PeopleForBikes. And joining me is Kyle Wagenschutz, Director of Local Innovations.
Hi, good afternoon.
In the next 40 or so minutes, we're going to be talking about our PlacesForBikes City Ratings. It's a program designed to help cities improve and grow bicycling fast. It encourages cities across the U.S. to build connected, comfortable bike networks and to get people out on riding them. But before we begin, let's do a few housekeeping notes. First of all, we're in webinar mode, which means you can hear me, but I can't hear you. Or at least hopefully you can hear me. And I'm going to ask you to go into your menu bar and just raise your hand if the sound is good. You can hear us, you can see the screen, everything looks good. I'm not seeing any hands. There's some hands starting to go up. I'll give you just a couple minutes, a couple seconds maybe to do that. If you do have trouble hearing us or seeing the broadcast, please type a note into the chat box and let us know so that we can deal with whatever audio or technical difficulties we have. I'm seeing some hands go up, so I think it's okay. Second, we will be recording the webinar, so we'll send you a link afterwards, so don't worry about the deck, you'll be able to get that. And we will be leaving some time at the end for questions, hopefully at least 15 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. So if you do have questions as we go through, please type them into the questions box in your menu. We'll get through as many as we can, and if we don't get to your question, we'll follow up over email. So hopefully that sounds good to everyone. And with that, I'm going to turn it over and let Kyle, who directs our PlacesForBikes program, talk a little bit about just the goals of the program and specifically the city ratings.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Our PlacesForBikes program here at PeopleForBikes is focused on helping communities use their energy and their efforts in really constructive ways to get better places to ride bikes on the ground and to get them accelerating the pace at which they're developing those programs and those projects. And so it's hyper-focused on helping local city leaders ranging from elected officials all the way down to interested community members figure out ways to be engaged at a higher level so that we don't have to wait decades to see our cities progress towards more bicycle-friendly places, that we can accomplish the same amount of effort in just a couple of years. We spend a lot of our time thinking about what are the tools and resources that communities could get access to help them, sort of plan this journey and just to plan their acceleration. We work at two levels to do that. One is that we're hyper-focused in some U.S. cities at a very local level. This is called our Big Jump project, where we work directly with leadership teams in 10 different U.S. cities, working to establish new methods of innovation, new methods of project delivery, new ways of engaging community members and building support, and trying to understand what are the most effective methods for us to convey to a much wider audience. And so the second level that we work at is at the national scale. We take all of those lessons that we learn, the case studies that we build, mostly the successes that are happening in cities coupled with the things that didn't quite work out the way we thought they would. And we build guidebooks, resources, toolkits to share widely that can be used by any city in the US. Our City Ratings program is an example of one of those programs where we were piloting and pioneering new ways of understanding how protected bicycle lanes and programs that support bicycling were changing communities. We're also developing a way to benchmark those progress in those cities, and we scaled that up to this national city ratings program so that any community can understand the progress that they're making on a year-to-year basis for bicycling.
Thanks, Kyle. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the PlacesForBikes City Ratings specifically. So as Kyle said, the City Ratings is a national program. A couple things about the program. The ratings are data-driven, which means that we use empirical measurements for each of the 5 factors that we're measuring. So we have an overall score on a 0 to 5 scale, with 5 stars being, kind of perfect bicycling experiences. And then we have 5 factors underneath that: ridership, safety, network quality, acceleration, and reach. We'll talk about each of those in just a minute. And each of those are also measured on a 0 to 5 point scale. But it is entirely data-driven. There is a transparent methodology available on our website with all of the details, with the goal that cities can use these data to benchmark where they are, set concrete goals for where they want to go, and then measure success on the way there. Scores are based on the specific outcomes Kyle mentioned that cities should be focused on, and that's building better, more connected, more complete bike networks, and then getting people out on those networks. The one other point I want to make about the city ratings is that cities are scored on a global scale, so it is a pretty stringent rating criteria. If we were rating, a city like Copenhagen or Amsterdam, we would expect them to do well, but still not be a perfect 5 stars. And we want to set the bars high. We want to encourage U.S. cities, to build bike networks and programs that make riding available and the experience of riding great for all ages and abilities all over towns, all over the U.S. So those ratings are based on 6 data sources, and you can see those listed here. 3 of them are sort of publicly available or already existing data sources, like the U.S. Census American Community Survey, the Fatality Analysis Reporting System, and the Physical Activity Council bicycle. It's an outdoor participation study, and bicycling is one of those outdoor activities. But we also had to create a few new data sources to fill in the gaps in our knowledge. So I want to talk about those quickly before we move on, and we'll go through each one of them in turn. The bicycle network analysis was one of the first things we developed. We launched it about a year and a half ago, I think, and the bicycle network analysis actually quantifies how easy it is for people in a city or town to get to the key destinations, the places they want to go, on a complete, connected, and this is important, comfortable bike network. And what that means is it's comfortable for kind of all ages and abilities. The BNA scores range from 0 to 100, where 100 would be a perfect score. That means the bike network would function just like the road network functions for cars. There are multiple ways to get to those key destinations. They're comfortable. You don't have to worry about whether you're going to be able to get there. And that would be a score of 100. And just to give you kind of a scale for performance, we did actually score Copenhagen on the BNA because it's based on OpenStreetMap, which is a Wikipedia of road and bike facility information that we use to create the BNA. So that's a globally available resource. So we did score Copenhagen, and they scored an 82 out of that 100-point scale. So not quite perfect, but definitely a B, a very strong B. The results and raw data for 510 U.S. cities and a handful of Canadian cities are available on our website right now. That's PeopleForBikes.org/BNA. So you can see not only the scores, you can see the maps, but you can also download the raw data in CSV or shapefile formats. If your city isn't currently listed and you'd like to get a BNA score, the easiest way to do that is to complete a city snapshot next year. What is the city snapshot? That's our next thing. So a city snapshot is completed by a city staff who has detailed knowledge of the bike facilities that were built in the last year and planned over the next couple of years. Bike share, that would be current state and future plans, both in terms of number of bikes and bike rides, events that get people on bikes, and occurrence of type A injuries, and that means injuries that require ambulance transport. So the city snapshot this year opened on October 1st, 2018. It closed on January 10th. The next round will open up on October 1st. 2019, and you can sign up if you want your name added to the list so that you can get a link so that your city can complete the city snapshot. You can sign up on our City Ratings webpage right now. If you go to PlacesForBikes.org, you can it will point you in that direction. The third new kind of data source that we had to create is called the PlacesForBikes Community Survey. And the idea here is that, we have very sort of empirical measures of safety and ridership. We'll talk about the details of those in just a second. But we also wanted to understand the subjective riding experience. So safety is probably the best example. It's important that we understand how many fatalities and injuries are occurring, but it's also important that we understand how safe it feels to ride a bike in a community. And that's really what the community survey is about. It allows the people who live and work and ride in a community to provide their subjective experiences of what it's like. So this year, the community survey opened on September 1st and closed on December 10th. We received over 50,000 survey responses representing 347 U.S. cities. The next round will open up on August 1st of 2019. So based on all these data sources, we calculate that overall score on a 0 to 5 scale, and that's based on 0 to 5 scores for each of those 5 categories: ridership, safety, network, acceleration, and reach. This year, we scored a total of a little over 47,000 U.S. cities. We have sufficient data to report reliably on 510 of those, and those results are currently available on our website. Again, that's PlacesForBikes.org. You can not only see the results, but you can download the raw data. There are all kinds of details on the methodology. But in the spirit of at least talking through that methodology on a high level, let's go through each of these factors, talk about what they mean, and then talk about how we measure them. So ridership is the first factor. How many people in a town or a city are riding both for transportation and for recreation? So the bicycle commuting is based on 40% of the score is bicycle commuting. So that's bike to work mode share as measured by the U.S. Census American Community Survey. So they measure the primary mode of travel to and from work among workers 16 and up. We do a couple of things to that bike to work mode share that's a little bit different than what you might be accustomed to seeing. First, we exclude people who take public transit, who walk, or who work from home, because we don't want to penalize cities who have high levels of alternative modes of transportation. So the bicycle commuting, that percentage of workers who commute primarily by bike is minus public transit, walking, and work from home. And we also look at land area, and we assign bike to work mode share targets based on the land area so that we don't penalize cities that have very large areas. Recreational bike riding is measured by the Physical Activity Council's Outdoor Participation Study, which is run by Sports Marketing Surveys. They measure the percentage of the population who participate in road bicycling or riding on paved surfaces, mountain biking or riding on unpaved surfaces, and BMX. And that's another 40% of that ridership score. And then 20% subjective perceptions of bike use. So based on the community survey, we collect information about both the transportation and recreation bicycle riding that's happening in U.S. cities and towns. Second factor is safety. So that's how safe is it to ride in a community and how safe does it feel? So 40% of that score is based on all mode fatality and injury rates. So those fatality rates are the number of fatalities across all modes per 10,000 people in the city or the town. And those fatalities are pulled from the Fatality Analysis Reporting System that's publicly available. And then we look at the injury rates. That's how many type A injuries, that's serious injuries requiring ambulance transport as defined by the CAPCO scale. And that also is per 10,000 people in the population. We get those type A injuries from the cities themselves in the city snapshot. Another 40% of the score is based on bike fatality and injury rates. And it's the same idea. Again, from the FARs, we pull the number of bicycle fatalities, and we do average that over a 5-year period, by the way, just to control for the fact that, there could be variable rates. If you only have one fatality, 1 year, it could double the next year without actually being a huge number of fatalities. So we do a 5-year average, and we do the average number of bicycle fatalities per 10,000 bike commuters for the bicycle fatalities, and the same for type A injuries. So it's the number of type A injuries for the bicycle provided by the city per 10,000 bike commuters. And finally, we have perceptions of safety. And again, that's from that Places for Bikes community survey, which measures how safe people feel riding a bike in their community. It includes safety around motor vehicles as well as personal safety when they're out on their bikes. So that would be fear of, assault, injury, harassment, that sort of thing. I think what we understand is that people won't get on bikes if they don't feel safe, in addition to, being on networks that are actually safe. The third factor is network. This is 80% the bicycle network analysis, which we just talked about. And then we also, in the community survey, measure perceptions of network quality. So that's, whether or not people feel like they can get the places they want to go, whether they feel like the bike network is connected to the places they want to go in their communities and the other people in their communities. Most city rating systems of some kind, for bicycles at least, have some measure of ridership, safety, and network quality. But the acceleration factor is something that is unique to the Places for Bikes City Ratings. What we're trying to measure here is how committed a city is to growing bicycling quickly. Are they doing all the right things to do great things for bikes in the next 3 to 5 years, even if maybe ridership or network quality isn't a top performer right now? So 80% of this score is based on the city snapshot, measuring the planned growth in bike facilities, bike share, and events. The city snapshot collects data on the percentage of increase in all of those things: bike facilities, bike share, including rides and bikes, and event participation in U.S. cities. And again, all of that data are provided by city staff via the city snapshot. Another 20% of the acceleration score is based on the community survey, where people in the community report on whether they feel like their city is investing in better places to ride, more events, better bicycling in the future. And finally, we have the reach score. The reach factor is also unique to the Places for Bike City Ratings. The idea here is to measure how well the bike network serves all members of the community. So 75% of this reach score is based on what we're calling a demographic gap analysis. That's a very confusing term to mean that what we do is we look at reach communities, or communities that are historically underserved based on demographics, and we look at the BNA scores in those reach communities compared to the BNA score of the community overall. We also look, the other 25%, bicycling rates by gender. So we can look at bike to work mode share for men and women and see what the gap looks like there. And we're setting a high bar here in that to earn points for reach, we want to see women's bike to work mode share be higher than men's, not just equivalent. And in the demographic gap analysis, we want to see the BNA scores in our reach communities actually be higher than the BNA scores overall. I'm going to show you a little picture of that demographic gap analysis just to help sort of explain what it is. This is a map of Denver, Colorado, and based on, again, U.S. Census demographic data, so things like age, and we look at the census block group level, we look at that, the percentage of very young or older folks. We look at economic indicators like median income and percent receiving public assistance. We look at distribution of ethnicity. And if a community over-indexes relative to the city as a whole on at least two of those factors, we define it as a reach community. And so for Denver, those blue highlighted areas are reach communities. And then we can compute the BNA scores for those reach communities and compare it to the BNA score overall. So that gets us back to our overall score. Again, 0 to 5 for each of the 5 categories and overall. Each of the 5 categories are equally weighted. And this is an important point, and when we get questions on fairly often is that at least in these first few years of the city ratings, while we're building up, more and better participation and data quality, we are awarding half of a bonus point to any city that provides all 6 data sources. And the best way to do that, again, is to sign up and have your city complete that city snapshot. So, without further ado, let's talk about the results. So, for 2019, these are our top 20 overall winners. Boulder, Colorado edges out Fort Collins this year, but keep in mind that that's a very narrow gap. It's like, I think, 0.2 points. They're very close to each other. Eugene, Oregon is up number 3. Manhattan, New York is number 4. That's also a change we made this year. We're scoring the New York City boroughs separately instead of New York City as a whole. And Arlington, Virginia round out the top 5. I think one of the things that I find most fascinating about the results is that we do get a mix of, big cities, medium-sized cities, college towns, and even a few relatively small cities. So this is our top 20. Kyle, do you want to talk at all about, some of our top scorers and maybe some of the ways that they stand out for you? Given especially that in order to be a top scorer, you have to score pretty well and, across all the categories. You can't get a top spot by, say, just doing really well on ridership, but nothing else.
I'd say, first of all, all of the top scorers from these 20 on down to the next 80 to 100, are first of all, rising to the top in our scoring system because they're fully participating in all aspects of the data process. If you see your score for your community and you think that it might be abnormally low, there is a possibility that the city did not actually submit the city snapshot, and it's not accumulating and accounting for all of the points that are likely due to your community. So first and foremost, full participation automatically rises communities to the top. I'd also say, the city ratings is designed to provide both a snapshot of where a community currently is in their work for bicycling. By looking at these scoring categories, we get a glimpse, a once-a-year picture of where cycling actually is. And then the acceleration category is a predictor of the potential of how much it's going to change over the next couple of years. Some of these communities have demonstrated lots of potential in the past and have built really successful programs based on past work, while others of these have yet to realize sort of the full benefits of cycling, the full benefits of their infrastructure and program investment, but are doing all of the right things to set the stage for success in years to come. And so that's one way in which the city ratings is different, is that it provides sort of this dual look, both at communities that have succeeded, communities that are going to succeed in the future. What's interesting about these top 20 is that these are communities that have done both in a lot of ways. They're building on the past successes. They're accelerating the pace at which they're working to build out their infrastructure and their programs. They're seeing more people riding bikes as a result. They're seeing in measurable ways streets are getting safer to ride bikes, and that they are performing, ahead of most of the rest of the country. My final point would just be that there's a lovely mix of large cities, small cities, and everybody in between in this community. And one of the major pieces of developing the city ratings was developing a metric that could be used by any community, regardless of their geographic location, regardless of their geopolitical size, their demographics. We normalize a lot of these scores to account for the variations of communities, to account for the differences that we're going to see. And so it's another way that large urban centers don't dominate this discussion. It's another way for small communities to understand how they're achieving success, and we're proud of the diversity of cities that exist in the top.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I might add to that is that, we talked about the city ratings being on a global scale, and certainly these are the top 20 for the US, but that's not to say that we don't have room to get better. I mean, as Kyle said, these communities are all doing some pretty amazing things, and many of them have been for decades. But, you know, none of these communities are scoring even 4 points on that 5-point scale. So we do have a lot of room to grow. And, you know, I'm pretty excited about the momentum we're seeing in some places. One of the things that I just want to show you is that we can also break down the results by, you know, different properties of the city, for example. So these would be the top 5 large cities, medium cities, and small cities. And in this case, I define large cities by having 300,000 or more people, medium 100,000 to less than 300,000, and small less than 100,000. But in the raw data file that you can download off the website, the population for each of these cities is in there, so you could, you know, sort it and compare in almost any way you like. But it's kind of an interesting picture, right? You see the large cities, you know, Brooklyn and Manhattan are right there up at the top. Portland, of course, number 3. Minneapolis, Washington, D.C., as Kyle said, all cities that have been, you know, working on the bike networks for a long time. On the medium side, you know, Boulder and Fort Collins, Eugene, Arlington, and of course Madison. And then in smaller cities, Lawrence, Kansas, Bentonville, Arkansas, and you know, Bentonville has been doing a ton of work, investments especially in the recreational paths and trails. Santa Barbara, California, Fayetteville, very close to Bentonville, where there's, again, a lot of development going on in terms of the off-street multi-use paths and recreational trails, and Santa Monica. Kyle, any thoughts on the city size results?
No additional thoughts. You know, these are the communities largely that make up the top performers, and when we look at this, you know, there's definitely some groupings that happen. You know, I think, again, just to point out that the city ratings allows for stars to shine that other kinds of systems like this don't actually account for. I think we're used to seeing cities that are in the large and some of the medium-sized cities pop up in the usual suspects and lists. And it's nice to know that those systems are validated through data, that, you know, perceptions around who's doing a good job hold true across the various different kinds of ratings and analyses that are done by different organizations and publications across the country. But also, you know, we're proud to be able to let the stars shine for communities that don't often receive that recognition. And, you know, kudos to everybody who's working and doing good work in those communities as well.
Great, so let's go on to the category winners. We're going to go through the top 10 for each of the 5 categories. We'll take a look at them, and then, you know, Kyle hopefully can give us a little bit of context around some of the exciting things going on in some of those places. I'm not going to go through the small, medium, and large results for each of the 5 categories, but you can, again, download that raw data off the website and take a look at those. So for ridership, Manhattan, New York, we have right up there. They have a very high bike to work mode share and a pretty high recreational ridership rate as well. Portland, no surprise, we would expect to see them, you know, up there with ridership. Cambridge, Washington, D.C., Crested Butte, as Kyle said, you know, we do see some surprises in here. For those of you not familiar with Crested Butte, it's a pretty tiny mountain town in Colorado. Lots of recreational riding, and you know, most of the destinations are kind of all in one little area. It's very easy to bike around town. Kyle, any other thoughts on these?
You know, this is one of the categories where, regardless of what assessment we're using, oftentimes looks the same in communities, because the data source, the primary data source, the American Community Survey, is the singular data source that we have that's comparable for all communities in the U.S. And so we oftentimes see this list put in the service of understanding how bicycling is actually working. Our results mirror those in some ways, although, you know, Jennifer mentioned, you know, the addition of understanding how recreational riding is also affecting ridership allows for communities like Crested Butte and others to also populate this list in a more substantial way. Interestingly enough, you know, there seems to be, you know, a fair amount of recreational riding in places that we may only consider to be sort of transportation or utilitarian purposes. I think this is also a category that demonstrates communities that have accelerated in the past or are currently accelerating, realizing the benefits of what, you know, advancing bicycle infrastructure, completing their bicycle networks, running the kinds of programs to get people motivated to ride bikes. This is one of those scoring categories that sort of comes as a result of other efforts, not as a sole effort in and of itself.
Great, thanks. Next up is safety, and recall that safety is partly a function of bicycle safety specifically, but also all mode safety, right? Because if it's safe for people to ride, we think that it's probably safe for all modes of transportation. Over time, we'll be able to explore that hypothesis a little bit more effectively once we have lots of, multi-years of data. It's a theory right now, for me at least. But safety, and then we also have the perceptions of safety. So Arlington, Virginia, Buellton, California, Lawrence, Kansas, Eugene, Oregon, Santa Monica. And keep in mind as you're looking at these safety scores that we are taking sort of a vision zero approach in that there has to be 0 fatalities in order to get all 5 points. So it's pretty tough criteria. Kyle, any thought about the safety winners?
This is one of the scoring categories in my mind that's the most straightforward to understanding. If people are being hit while riding bicycles and it's resulting in injuries or fatalities, it's simply an understanding of the numbers of what's happening there. I think, the added advantage of the community survey is that it gives us an understanding of how people perceive safety to be. And as I look at sort of, trying to understand what the city ratings mean, what is an annual piece of data about how riding is in my community, I oftentimes look at how do people perceive these actions to be compared to what the data shows they actually are. And this is one of the more fascinating categories for this in my mind. We have quite a few communities in the ratings where people feel that the safety is great. They may ride on a singular trail system that never intersects the roadway for recreational purposes, but get off that roadway and we're finding that the injury and fatality rates are very, very high compared to peers across the US. The opposite is also true. There's a lot of places that have really amazing places to ride. The danger is actually very low if you're just looking at the rate of injury, the rate of fatalities, but people's perceptions actually are that it's a very dangerous experience. And we know that perceptions of safety and how that influences whether people will ever ride a bike or not is a really important factor to understand. And so while this can be by the numbers, I think there's a lot of nuance in understanding the difference between perception and reality.
Yeah, and for you other data geeks out there who spend a lot of time in safety data, I think if we're honest, fatalities and type A injuries, which are sort of the empirical data points we have available to us, probably don't really tell the whole story either, which could also explain when there's gaps between the perceptions and fatality or type A injury rates. We don't have a measure of close calls or near misses. We don't have a measure of, injuries that happen in absence of, a police being called to a car, kind of car crash or incident. So there's a lot we're missing, and we know that. I think we're doing the best we can do given what we have to work with, but we're always looking for better, more accurate ways that are also comparable nationally to use in this system. So, I think safety for me has been one of the most difficult on that front for sure. Network quality. So as I mentioned, 80% of this score is the bike network analysis. So measuring how complete, comfortable, and connected the bike network is. Another 20% is that perception. So the winners we have here, Provincetown, Boulder, Marquette, Michigan, Davis, California. No surprise, we see them coming up. They've spent kind of decades working on their network. Santa Maria, Fort Collins, Arcata, California, Enid, Oklahoma, Jackson, Wyoming, and our first Alaskan show, and I hope I'm not butchering this name, and if I am, please somebody correct me, Soldotna, Alaska. Kyle, thoughts about the network performance?
So I mentioned before that our Places for Bikes program is primarily established to help communities build physical infrastructure, to build physical places to ride bikes. And that could look like protected bike lanes in cities. It could look like enhanced corridors in residential neighborhoods and small towns that make it safer and more comfortable to ride bikes without bike infrastructure. It could look like bike parks. It could look like mountain bike trails on the outskirts of your city or in the mountains. There's a lot of variety of places to ride bikes, and the network score is one of the ones in which we think from across all of the city ratings has an influence on everything else that's focused here. It influences the presence of infrastructure by research that we understand. It shows that if you have infrastructure, people will ride on it. If you have separated infrastructure that provides safe places for people to ride, the streets get safer. We know that that infrastructure investments are the easiest and most direct way that communities have to influence the number of people riding bikes every day. It's also the piece that we're lagging behind the furthest on here in the US. And so communities that are scoring well in the network are thinking not just about how many miles of bike lanes we build, how many miles of trails we have, but where do those trails connect to? How do they connect people to each other? How do they connect people to the destinations they're trying to travel to? And so this was a big piece of, the city ratings, and Jennifer mentioned earlier that the bicycle network analysis, which formulates a large portion of the score here in the network score, was one of the very first pieces of data sources that we actually created. And the reason behind that is because previous to this, we only had an understanding of how many miles a community was building. But if you asked a community, did you build 100 miles in the last year? And they say yes. And you ask another community, did they build 100 miles? There was no real evaluative way to understand whether or not those 100 miles meant anything differently to those communities. And so the bicycle network analysis allows us to understand the quality of the bicycle network, both in terms of what kind of rider would ride on that, looking towards, understanding how people who aren't riding today perceive safety to be, providing them safe, comfortable places to go. And then also, does that network actually connect them to the place they want to go? I oftentimes use the analogy when I'm speaking that whenever you get in your car to go to Walmart to buy a widget, you never once think about, am I going to make it to the front door of Walmart? You actually just get in your car, you drive straight there, because you know the network is fundamentally going to allow you seamless access in your car directly to the front door of your destination. However, if you got on your bicycle to go to Walmart to get that widget, you have to think really carefully about the route that you select, the intersections you're going to cross, how you're actually going to get there, and then fundamentally, will you actually be able to get there at all? And that's what the network score is getting at, is do we have that same level of confidence in our physical environment that we can actually reach the kind of place that we want to go?
Great. Next up is acceleration. And, Kyle talked a little bit about this. It's one of my favorite categories because it gives cities who haven't spent, the last 3 or 4 decades building a great network a chance to show us that they're working really hard to make it great moving forward. Winner here, Memphis, Tennessee. I think Kyle is uniquely situated to be able to talk about what Memphis is doing. Fayetteville, Arkansas, Huntsville, Alabama, Providence, Rhode Island, New Orleans, all places that they've got audacious plans to expand the network in really impressive ways. And Kyle, you want to provide some background on that?
The other facet of the Places for Bikes program is not just about building networks and creating those places for people to ride. It's also about accelerating the pace at which cities are providing those opportunities. And so if we look at the historical progress for bicycling in the US, we can look back 30 to 40 years and see a progression towards communities making incremental investments in programs, in projects, in people, and incrementally over those couple of decades, measuring a lot of success in certain communities for that. However, I'd like to be alive when all of our cities achieve those same levels of success. And in fact, we're not even content with the level of success we've actually seen here in the US, because we know from our colleagues in Western Europe and Central and South America and other parts of the world that we're actually really behind as a collective, as a country of cities. We're behind, we're off the pace. And the question is, do we need to, does it actually take decades to make this progress happen? And we don't think it actually does. We have examples from places in Canada now. We have examples from places in Spain of where concerted efforts to accelerate the pace at which we're building, combined with accelerated projects to expand access to bicycles and to encourage people to ride them, can yield the same kinds of results that we've seen here in the US over 40 years in just a tenth of the time. And so acceleration is our way of trying to capture an understanding of what cities are making the biggest moves. Also as an opportunity to recognize cities that have a long way to go in terms of achieving real ridership that can be recognized, real safety to be recognized, even real network scores to be recognized, but are doing all of the right things. So you'll notice that a lot of these communities exist in the southeastern United States, for instance. And somebody asked me just this past week, why do so many southeastern cities score really well in the acceleration category? And my answer was simple. It's because they have the furthest to go. And so making any kind of significant investment in time and energy in planning this network is going to have a big impact on what happens for these other scoring categories. But you'll also notice in this list and in others in the acceleration category that even cities that have achieved success in the past are continuing to accelerate. And that's a really important factor for us to consider, you know, that maybe we did take 40 years to achieve the first major milestone for bicycling, but on this global scale, there's still room for growth, and there's a lot of room for growth, and that we can't rest on our laurels as a community. We have an ambition and an urgency to continue to act. And so acceleration just gives us that short-term look at guessing the potential of a community. It doesn't guarantee success by any means, but it's a way of helping us identify rising stars among the bunch.
And I think this is a place too where, as we move forward and collect more data, we're gonna be able to start to see, you know, cities that have scored well in acceleration in the past. Do those plans really come to fruition? Do we see those increases in networks, that increases in ridership, the improvements in safety that should come along with all of the plans that they're making? So that part is super exciting for me. All right, our fifth and final category is in some ways the most difficult and has been for us to get our heads around. And again, the idea with REACH is, does the bicycle network serve all members of the community equivalently? And so our winners here: Springdale, Arkansas; Enid, Oklahoma; Dubuque, Iowa; South Bend; Crested Butte. You can read, you know, all 10 of those. They're all on the website. And you know, again, these are communities or these are cities and towns in which REACH communities are at least on par with or outperforming, you know, the city as a whole. You know, if we're honest, and Kyle can talk a little bit about, you know, where he's seeing successes here, but if we're honest, I think the piece that we're not measuring very well right now is the intentionality around that. Whether those, you know, whether those communities are being intentionally overserved, or, you know, and in other places intentionally underserved, or whether, you know, it's sort of a function of maybe where the destinations are or how the city is laid out in some way.
Yeah, cities across the country are increasingly concerned about making sure that the investments they're making in projects, in programs, and in people are having a fair and equitable impact on the populations they serve, and rightfully so. We don't have, from a data-driven standpoint, the capacity and the capabilities to sort of, you know, provide a true bike equity score. There's not enough comparable data to really sort of make that happen on a national basis in a way that doesn't require a lot of additional reporting on the behalf of cities. We tried, believe me. And so as a first step, and we mentioned this last year as well, this REACH score allows us to simply narrow in on one facet of understanding how well communities of concern are connected to their neighborhood by bicycles. And we have our methodology document sort of defines how we establish where those communities exist and where they don't. But it's a really simple understanding of just today whether or not all of your communities have equal access and connectivity by bicycle to the places that everybody else does. I would say that there's a lot of communities where this measurement shows some really stark contrast, and it's really interesting to sort of have it both graphically shown and then sort of scored on a continuum here of understanding, how a city is performing. And I think what Jennifer mentioned is really important. This in no way measures or provides an analysis of the city's intention or the deliberate nature by which they're going about solving those challenges. It's simply a representation of what is in this. And so we're continuing to work on improving this. We don't believe that it's a fully representative understanding of what's happening in terms of serving communities, but it's a first start, and we're continuing to work with a lot of city partners on better understanding both what it means and how we can improve it in the future.
And I think that last piece is key. The whole point of the city ratings is to provide metrics that cities can use to benchmark, set goals, and measure achievement. And I think the REACH score right now is a baby step in that direction, and we look forward to, as we collect more and more data, getting a better understanding, working with our city partners around what it means and how to create positive action from it. All right, that pretty much wraps up the results and methodology. I would like to point out again, the results for all 510 cities we scored this year are available on our website. The complete methodology, which is many, many, many pages, I apologize for that. I would have made it shorter if I could come up with a way to do it. And downloadable raw data. So you can download all of the raw data, all of the scores are in there, along with things like bike to work mode share and population and things like that. We also provide downloadable one-page, what we're calling scorecards, that show the overall scores, the scores on each of the 5 categories, shows the bicycle network analysis heat map, and then also offers some general recommendations depending on your scores in each category. I think some of the feedback we've gotten about those recommendations is that sometimes cities feel like they're already doing some of those things, and in some cases it's probably true. And we've been talking a lot internally about that, and particularly, if you're a city that you're kind of right on the edge of a score, you're a 2.8 or a 2.9 or something like that, that really maybe what you need is to look at the cities that are scoring a half or a full point ahead of you and, think about what they're doing. And so, we are continuing to work on those recommendations as well, but we like to think it's a decent starting point. Kyle, any closing thoughts before we go to questions? I do want to make sure we get a time for a few of those at least.
Yeah, in addition to having the scorecard, which provides a basis for recommendations on what communities can do, both to improve their score, but ultimately to improve, the experience of riding a bicycle in these communities, is we are also engaging on a series of workshops that'll start taking place this summer and will last through 2020. We're working in communities across the U.S. to host one-day training events that lets us get a little bit more into the details with community and regional leaders around both the scoring mechanisms that we've presented here today and also helping to develop strategies for making improvements. So we've established the cities that we're going to be in here in 2019, but we're still looking for more host cities to host a workshop in 2020. We have an application, short application just to show your interest if you'd like us to come to your community in 2020. All of that's available on the PlacesForBikes.org website, alongside all the information about city ratings and the bicycle network analysis. We have about 7 minutes left, and I just want to reiterate what Jennifer said earlier. We're going to sort of roll through a couple questions here. I'm probably going to ask these to Jennifer and broaden them a little bit, just so we can have sort of a universal applicability to some of the questions. We will provide direct answers to each of you that have a question if it goes unanswered during the call today. But we're going to be mindful of everyone's time and stop right at the top of the hour. And so Jennifer, if I can just...
Let me just add quickly too that, if we don't get to your question or you didn't get a chance to type in your question or you have a question later, my email address and Kyle's email address are both right there on the screen, so feel free to reach out to us if something comes up afterwards.
Cool. So Jennifer, as I peruse these, maybe you can just first start off on the safety category. There was you used a phrase about type A injuries. Can you just rehash sort of what the definition of a type A injury is?
Sure. If you just do a Google search for CABCO, K-A-B-C-O, it defines type A injuries. That's the definition we're using. The city snapshot is also available for download off the website, and you can take a look at how we're asking about that exactly.
Awesome. Let's see. We covered some of this in the language. There's a lot of questions here about, can we get a list of cities and sorted by individual scoring categories? Can we sort the list of cities by states? What are the different ways in which people can take a look at all 510 communities and sort them for their own needs?
Yeah, sure. Our website, and that's PlacesForBikes.org, it's right up there on the screen. Our website actually allows you to sort winners overall by category. You can sort by population. So you can do some of that basic sorting right on the website. If you want to do something more complicated, like you want top 5 ridership for large cities, something like that, you can actually download the raw data, and then it's a CSV or Excel file. So you can sort, right there in the file at that point, if it's something that you want to do more complicated than what's available on the website.
There's some interest here about communities utilizing the bicycle network analysis as a way of understanding and hypothesizing about what it means for the future. If a city makes an investment in their bicycle network, does the bicycle network analysis allow us to predict what those changes would be, and if so, how would a community go about doing that?
Yeah, it's my dream that eventually we manage to get enough funding to create a relatively automated way for cities to go in and take a look at their current bicycle network analysis and estimate, what the improvement is going to be given, installation of X, Y, and Z projects or the entire bike master plan or something like that. Unfortunately, we don't have the funding to build out a very easy API or interface with the website right now. So what cities are doing right now, and I think it's working out relatively well, is if you as a city have an internal capability, to work with shape files and with OpenStreetMap, you can kind of do it manually on your own. A lot of cities right now are reaching out to tool design group and also planning and those kinds of guys to take the BNA as it is now and sort of estimate what the current state is, and then see what happens to the BNA as they institute particular projects or groups of projects. We've seen cities be very successful in looking at that, putting in a whole bike plan and seeing that, actually it doesn't improve connectivity. As Kyle said, it's not just about miles, it's about making sure you're connecting people to where they want to go. I think most of us have probably been on the bike lane to nowhere at some point in time. Doesn't help you a lot. But the BNA is being used to make sure that we're optimizing our investments to get the best in connectivity. One of the things I look forward to in the future is being able to look at how the BNA and improvements in the BNA actually correlate with improvements in ridership and improvements in safety. We don't have enough data to do that right now, but after we've been running this project for, a number of years, we'll be able to start looking at those connections. And, I'm hopeful that someday we can actually say, on average, a 1 unit improvement in the BNA nets this much increase in ridership and this much, improvement in safety outcomes.
Last question, and again, we'll answer any unanswered questions directly via email afterwards. Is there any relationship between city ratings, bicycle retail shops, bicycle industry? Is there a direct link to understanding how these scores may or may not be an indicator of other kinds of bicycle-related business?
Yeah, sure. So we've done a little bit with that. We don't have a lot of economic data that's comparable across cities. I do have Georgia Data Services actually can estimate independent bike dealer, that's specialty bike retail sales at the city level. That's comparable from city to city. And we actually have seen that cities with bike network scores of 40 or better have almost double the per capita bike sales that cities with lower scores have. So we do see early indications that there is a relationship between quality of the bike network and actually bike retail sales, at least through that specialty channel. We have a lot of work to do on that front. It's interesting because we could look at any number of economic indicators. We could also look at health indicators, public health indicators like, BMI scores or percent rates of obesity and other things. I'm hopeful that there are people out there who will take these data and take them and connect them to those, other important things that that we need to move the needle on: climate change, obesity, health outcomes, all those other economic development, all of those things. All right, it looks like we're at time. Thanks, everyone. It also looks like we have a lot of questions that we maybe didn't get to, so we will follow up via email for all of those questions. Thanks, everybody, for participating. We're glad you're interested in the Places for Bike City Ratings, and feel free to reach out to us if you have any other questions.